All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Good, Good, Bad. For the vast majority of you, this is a completely new series we're launching here on the Dirtbag Diaries. But if you've been a Diaries Plus subscriber, you've been listening to this for almost a year now. With member support, we have been developing the series about journeys, adventures, trips, races, and the people who accept that challenge. And it has all been made possible through listener support, which is just incredible. So many of you step forward to say that you believe this show should keep going into its next decade. We are very, very grateful. To those of you who aren't members, the fate of the Diaries is not a done deal. You get to weigh in. You get a vote in what happens to us as the media landscape shifts and algorithms make it harder for independent creatives to find and keep audiences. We are deeply grateful to the sponsors who have stayed with us, who have kept us going, but we also could not have done it without our Diaries Plus members. We would not be here, period. So please consider joining. The link is in the show notes. It's why we're here today and why this year we're going to bring you more stories. So every adventure has its good parts, its even better parts, and its difficult parts. These are the memories that stay with us, that create a richness of friendship, experience, and learning in an otherwise deeply complicated world. This series celebrates that while also providing a little bit of ongoing inspiration to keep you planning and scheming and saying yes when friends invite you on a journey. Today's story, it starts with a text message. Brian Cole is a veteran of the adventure space. Through his work in sports marketing and advocacy, he's helped facilitate the careers of some of the most prominent professional athletes in our space. Today, he works as a connector between brands, not-for-profits, and athletes and creatives. Just don't call him an agent. He's good at his job because he, too, has the dreamer's spirit. So when he calls or texts, it usually means something intriguing is in the works. Last year, the invite arrived. The Cape Loop, bikepacking, Baja. Who is in? I knew I would need something to look forward to, something to get me through the year. So I think within 3 minutes, I responded yes. I knew very little about this adventure, what it entailed, or who I was going with. But I knew it would probably be good. And it was a great decision. So today, on this edition of Good, Good, Bad, we break down the Cape Loop, an achievable biking journey along the back roads, empty beaches, and small towns of southern Baja. And there's always a deeper story, right? I'm Fitz Cahall. This is the Dirtbag Diaries.
I'm Brian Cole, and I live in Hood River, Oregon, which is relatively new. Been here about 5 years, but was in Northern California before that and grew up in Southern California. So I've been riding bikes since I was about 6. So that's been a long time. What I should add, which will come into play later in the story too, was that I actually started riding motorcycles when I was 4. So it took me a while to learn to ride a bicycle because I didn't have the need to learn how to pedal. I could just turn a throttle and make the thing go. And so it took me a minute to figure out pedaling, and of course that was in the time of training wheels too, which have long since gone for teaching kids how to ride bikes. So
We're obviously doing a Good, Good, Bad, which is about just cool adventures that a lot of us could do that are kind of like bucket list items. They're not easy, but they're not the craziest things in the world either too. So break it down for me. What is the Baja Cape Loop?
I think in order to understand what the Baja Cape Loop is, you need to understand what the Baja Divide is. And I think, the Baja Divide was first pioneered in around 2015, I think, by Lel Wilcox and Nicholas Carmen. And they started in San Diego, and their goal was to essentially link up as much dirt as possible all the way down from the northernmost point of Baja, California, the Baja Peninsula, in Tecate, all the way down to the southern tip around Cabo San Lucas. They actually started at the San Diego airport. And so they pedaled from the San Diego airport to Tecate. at the border, crossed the border, and then proceeded to link up what has now become known as the Baja Divide, which is a 1,700-mile, mostly dirt route that literally sort of ping-pongs back and forth between the two, incredible bodies of water that surround Baja, which are the Sea of Cortez and the Pacific Ocean. So it's essentially a lollipop. So it comes down, and just down near the bottom of Baja, it goes through La Paz, and then in La Paz, it sort of goes down the Sea of Cortez and then crosses back up over the mountains to the Pacific, and then back up through the mountains and back to the Sea of Cortez and back to La Paz. And so for whatever reason, at that point in time, the finishing point was in La Paz, Mexico. And so that southern portion of that lollipop is what has now become known as the Cape Loop. And it's become really popular, I think, because it's about 240 to 275 miles, depending on exactly how you do it. There's some variations, and there's a lot of opportunities to take side trips if you want. But that's become a much more manageable chunk. I mean, the Baja Divide itself is 1,700 miles. So to be able to fly into San Jose del Cabo, prepare your bike, and literally start the ride right out of the airport if you wanted to, you could go on a 8 or 9 or 10-day trip and see an incredible portion of Baja in what has now become known as the Cape Loop. But it is that southern section of the entire Baja Divide, sort of the final stage.
Yeah, you mentioned that it is becoming a little bit more of a thing. I think popular might be an extreme word for it, but what's the draw of it? Because I think, sometimes people think Cabo and they think of partying, right? And sometimes people think of Baja and they think of really just sort of austere desert. But this was a really rich experience.
I mean, for one, it's Baja, and Baja just has this magical allure anyway. For me, I've been going down to Baja almost my entire life. And so this is an area that I've spent a lot of time, but I've never explored sort of, the nooks and crannies of the back roads. And being a lifelong cyclist and primarily a mountain biker, this was something that came onto my radar. But it truly, from my perspective, having driven the peninsula a bunch of times and growing up going down there literally every single year, it really is the best of Baja. You get incredible desert, which is just magical. And coming from the Pacific Northwest, just getting into the desert is an entirely sort of mind-blowing experience in itself. But you also get the Sea of Cortez, you get the Pacific Ocean. From a cultural standpoint, the route actually skips Cabo San Lucas. So you skip this like stereotypical idea of what Cabo is, even though you're flying into the San Jose del Cabo airport if you're going to do it by plane to get there. But you skip that part and you get to see everything else that is truly the magic of Baja. There's some incredible towns, little ranchos, just beautiful places just to stop and take in this amazing landscape. There's a mountain range down there that goes up over, I think it's right around 3,000 feet, above sea level. So you cross that range essentially twice, only one major day over, up and over the top. But to be able to go from the Sea of Cortez and literally across the desert and then rise up over a coastal range and look down onto the Pacific, I mean, it's absolutely magical. So, and in that, you could do this route if you wanted to with a credit card and just hit a few spots and find places to stay and sort of link up some of the towns themselves. But if you choose to do it in a more rugged fashion, the camping is unreal. I mean, from beautiful desert arroyos to secluded beaches, camping up on the mountaintops. I mean, it's all there, and all of that sort of packaged in this international experience, which is Baja, and pretty easy to get to. It's a really easy way to have an international bikepacking experience that from a logistics standpoint is quite straightforward and pretty mind-blowing. You've got the factor of the foreign language, foreign currency. The food is phenomenal. The people are friendly. It's literally just like one thing after another that sort of keeps ticking up on this list of like reasons to go. I grew up in northern San Diego County, so by proximity, we were pretty close to Baja. I think my dad first went down in around 1970. No, sorry, he first went down around 79. Once my dad went once, that was it. Like Baja was like in our blood. We were going to Baja, and so, after I was around 7 or 8, we started going every single year. The day school got out, we were caravanning down to Baja, and we would spend about 10 days or 2 weeks making our way down to this area, actually where the Cape Loop is. At the time, there wasn't much down there. It was just fishing villages and pretty simple living. And we would go for anywhere from 5 to 6 weeks. So It was a big chunk of our summer experience. I've been going to this place my whole life, and we went to all kinds of places. Like, I've never known Baja the way that I do now after this, since going on this trip, because of the way that we traveled. And I think, whether you're on foot or bike or even horseback, like just slowing down, getting off the beaten path and getting out of the vehicles is just a great way to see a place and get to know a place.
Having been on this trip with you, I would also second, I thought one of the magical parts was that as a mountain biker, I don't think I would necessarily have picked these roads out, right? I'm not usually looking for like a dirt road unless I'm pedaling up it to try to find some bit of single track or whatnot. But like, taking all together, what I thought was really an incredible sort of experience was that I ended up in places I just wouldn't have ended up. Like, if I had gone as a tourist to Baja, I certainly wouldn't have ended up in some of those small little ranching communities. I certainly wouldn't have necessarily thought to stop, because they aren't the places in the guidebooks. They aren't the places people are writing about on Google Maps. You just end up in these really cool situations where you end up in a little tiny restaurant, or just having a conversation with somebody you would otherwise never connect with. And I thought that was one of the amazing parts about it. Well, what about the bad? Like, I don't want to sandbag anyone here, but the reality is, like, every trip like this, it can be pretty tough. Like, what are the difficult parts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you've done any bike packing, or if you're just a general, enthusiast of mountain biking, like, you're used to a cadence with how you ride. You're used to a flow. You're used to a pace. And Baja is nothing like that pace you've ever been used to. It's hot. It's sandy. It's slow going. I mean, there are people that do it fast, but they're nuts in my opinion. And that's not really bike packing to me. Like, we live in this time where there's so much information also, right? So, I mean, anyone can go online and they can watch somebody's entire trip down the Baja Divide, and they can see everything that's coming. I try to, with these kinds of experiences, like, I do a little bit of research, but I don't want to know too much, because I don't want the sense of adventure to be taken away from the trip itself. That being said, growing up, going to Baja, I mean, my dad always said, like, everything in Baja has thorns, it bites, or it stings. And there's some truth to that, and whether it's, the metaphor of the heat and the sand and the other things that come with Baja, really any time of year, especially southern Baja, it's challenging. There's a town every couple of days, but, there are sections that are long miles, exposed miles. I mean, there was a day or two that we never saw another vehicle or another person, I feel like, or maybe one, or two. So there's a couple of things, that could go really wrong, right? I mean, certainly injury. We brought pretty robust first aid kits. We also had a crew that had a good amount of experience in the backcountry through different, points of life and career. And, one of the folks with us is a medic, and, another one had been a guide. And point being, like, the medical factor is like something for consideration. And, in this case, dehydration would be the most major sort of medical concern, I would say, aside from actually having a fall and breaking your leg or something. But the water is a real issue. It was a particularly dry, rainy season in Baja this year. So places where there was maybe going to be water, like natural water, simply did not have natural water. So water weight is one of the things that you have to factor in. You're going to carry between 8 and 10 liters on the days when you're not going to get water. So you're adding 20 plus pounds to your already heavy bike and setup. That is a factor. But the other thing, certainly would be mechanicals. I mean, we prepared for that. Tubeless tires with lots of stands. We all overloaded our stands before we rolled out. And, miraculously, 4 of us over 250 something miles or whatever it was, we had 0 real flats. We had all kinds of thorns that we pulled out. And luckily the tire sealant sealed up those spots. And every couple of days we would put some air in, but you're running pretty low pressure anyway. And, if you were having to change a tube or dealing with flats like we used to do, I mean, that you could lose days. So that being said, there's, I think, 3 or 4 different places even where there are bike shops in the villages you go through along the route. So there are spots, but how you would get from broken down in the middle of the desert to one of those places would be a long, slow journey, I'm sure. But that being said, all of those things that made it hard are also the things that we went for. It's like the Aikido of Baja. It's like using the things that seem like they're going to be the challenges and just embracing them in a way that you can use them to your advantage. I knew it would be hard. And so when it's hard, instead of begrudgingly getting pissed off that like, oh, it's sandy and it's hot and I'm going uphill and I have another 2,000 feet to climb, that's sort of what you're there to do. And so finding that mindset and that recognition that, the obstacle really is the way, that you just keep pedaling and you just keep making progress. And basically, the word hike and bike are only one letter apart. Nobody cares if you get off your bike and walk for a little while. In fact, after you've been in the saddle all day, it feels great to go for a walk for a little bit. Like it's your time, it's your pace. And I think that was part of really what made this trip something special, was that we had enough time allotted to do it, that it really didn't matter how far we got each day, because we never said, by the end of today, we're going to be in this spot. Like, we just knew that the day would be what the day was, and we would make the most of it along the way. And without fail, like every night that we went to sleep, we had an awesome place to stay, and we were psyched by the end of every day. And every one of them was incredibly full and rich.
Yeah. What memories do you think are going to stick with you? Support for the Diaries comes from Kuat Racks. They've released the Ibex, an overlanding truck bed rack that handles substantial loads both on and off the grid, because we could all use some time off the grid, seriously. Constructed from lightweight yet durable aluminum, the black powder coat is made for all the nature you can throw at it. Available in different frame sizes to accommodate most truck models, the Ibex is engineered for adventure with versatile full and half-height configuration. It's an ecosystem of adventure possibilities. For more details, visit kuat.com. Kuat, because you will absolutely love this bed rack and go dope places. Do you have a resolution to adventure outdoors more this year? Make it happen with Sierra Club Outings. Leaders in conservation-focused, active outdoor adventures, Sierra Club Outings hosts over 250 small group trips every year where you can backpack, kayak, raft, volunteer, and more. These trips fill up fast, so reserve your spot at sierraclub.org/outings and use the code DIRTBAG to get $100 off. With Sierra Club Outings, it's more than just a trip. It's an adventure with a cause. We'll put a link in the show notes. Check out all the incredible trips they have and make that resolution happen. Yeah, what memories do you think are going to stick with you?
Oh man, I mean, there's so many memories for sure. I mean, certainly out of the gates, just the hot and the sand, and that was a factor. But some of the single track that we rode was incredibly beautiful. It was pretty chunky and lots of cactus just off the trail and rocky, but we were descending down into a little fishing village and a diving destination, and coming down that single track right at sunset, just like, I just have this like vision in my mind that I think I will never shake, which was soon followed by our first swim in the Sea of Cortez at the end of a really full day, like literally just washing that day off. And we happened to be in a village, so we went to dinner and had a great dinner and a margarita. And like that evening, we pedaled a mile north out of town and went and camped on the beach under what was a full moon. So that first day was incredible. I mean, I have so many memories. I have an amazing memory. Not long after, well, we realized quickly that we were going to need to take siestas, like pedaling through the heat of the day. Between 12:30 and 2 or so was going to be just not worth doing. So. On the second day, we managed to come upon a restaurant that was in the middle of nowhere that had a small hotel associated with it, and nobody was staying at the hotel. So we had a nice lunch, and what do you know? They had a pool and some shade. So that day was the day we realized how sweet the siesta could be. And they were like, yeah, have at it. Have a swim, And so we took a swim, we put our feet up. We all probably took a snooze for 20 or 30 minutes. And then, we pedaled on into the night. I have an incredible memory of a moment of laughter. We had sort of stopped and we saw these dogs up ahead of us. And Fitz, you were like, all right, I'm going to go for it. And we could see where this dirt road was winding down. We could probably see a quarter mile of this dirt road. And you took off hammering the pedals.
And these dogs were here for it too. They were like, oh yeah, we see what's about to happen.
Here come the gringos, and so no sooner does Fitz pass the dogs, and they are just like full throttle chasing top speed, and you were just hammering the pedals. And then there's three of us up there like, just laughing our asses off at you getting chased by these dogs, which are some sort of pit bull mix, like almost every dog in Baja, but, and not knowing, of course, if you were going to be devoured or what, but like all we could see is you disappear around the corner with these dogs just full steam ahead. So that was another great moment. I mentioned the views. That following day, we climbed up and over the mountains, and that first moment we saw the Pacific because we had been coming down the Sea of Cortez. So we went up and over the mountain range, and the first moment we saw the Pacific was magical, and we were on top of the range at that point. So that was followed by a 2,500 foot old double track Jeep road descent, which was just ripping riding. I mean, that was some of the most fun we had on our bikes, like the entire trip down into that zone. So
yeah, that was definitely like, for me, I feel like that was one of those things of just like seeing the Pacific Ocean out there and flying, and we lost so much elevation. I mean, like we lost like $4,000 or $3,000 of elevation over, but you could see the whole road ahead of you, and it was just, that was like an exceptional moment to be alive. That was awesome.
For sure. And I'd be remiss, of course, not to mention the camaraderie, right? Like we were a group of 4, which I think was really an awesome and ideal size. It allows for all kinds of different scenarios, most of which we didn't encounter. Should we have to break the group up into 2 or use the buddy system and sort of stagger a little bit. But honestly, just like the times that we spent just long hours in the saddle, full days, and it's not very often these days where we get to spend, 9 full days just with a couple of people really in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we passed through towns and there were a couple of short sections of pavement, but mostly it was just the 4 of us out there in the middle of nowhere, talking, getting to know each other. I mean, not a stone was unturned with respect to the subjects we talked about and the dreams that we shared, and just the beauty of an adventure, with just a small group of buddies. So that was great. And I also loved that everyone who came on the trip, I knew everybody, but not all 4 people didn't really know each other. But I also just had a hunch that it was going to be a good crew, and it just turned out to be a great bonding experience for all of us too.
There was a moment on the trip where I remember you used Baja as a verb, and you brought that up as that everything that it was like everything in Baja sort of stings or bites or has a thorn on it. That moment when you brought up that term to Baja, we were blasting down this hill. It was early morning. It was just this beautiful sunrise, and you pulled up, and I could see that you were emotional, and you were talking about your dad. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share what was going through your head in that moment, and kind of, what's happened in your world, what's happened in your dad's world, because obviously this is a place you shared.
Yeah, for sure. I'll see if I can do it without getting emotional now. But as I shared, going down to Baja my entire life, it was always an experience. It was for our whole family, but a lot of the time was spent just with my dad and I. A lot of times we would do the sort of the caravan camping drive down, and then maybe my mom and sister would fly down and we would pick them up. So a lot of the time was spent sitting shotgun, sort of driving down, largely listening to my dad's music, whether it was Alabama or Merle Haggard or just some of the classic country greats. But it was me sort of riding shotgun on his trip. This trip was a little bit different because this was really sort of an adventure type trip that I'm drawn to here in my backyard, but that I had never done in Baja just for myself, and like was something I really, really wanted to do. And so, especially in the early days of this trip, when it was difficult and when I was sort of questioning, like, what the fuck are we doing out here? Sometimes it was really hard. And I started to have this realization that like, I was starting to make this area of Baja my own, right? It was a place I had seen through other eyes. It was a place that I had known through our family adventures, but it was starting to become now a place that I was seeing through my own experience in a way that was uniquely different for a trip that I had been envisioning and helped to put together, for our crew that went down. So from that perspective, there was this like transition that was happening for how I was embracing the place. But what I came to realize was also that my dad is 84 now. He's got Parkinson's disease, and we're not sure if he'll ever go to Baja again. He's got a ton of life left, and he's sharp as a tack. But from a physicality standpoint, him traveling to Baja, even via plane, is challenging. So there was a lot of that reality coming up for me of like, oh wow, I've been coming down here every year my entire life, and with my dad, and now my dad might never see this place again. I wasn't so conscious of all of that stuff until this moment that you're sort of talking about, which was this early morning. We caught the sunrise. We had about 10 miles of downhill. We're on loaded bikes going downhill, ripping on dirt. and just crossing this super sandy wash and sort of assuming the like how to ride sand position. And all of a sudden I had this like flashback of my dad teaching me how to ride sand on my mini bike when I was 4 or 5 years old. I mean, I was a little kid when he first taught me how to ride in sand. And it was the exact same motion. And all of a sudden, just that motion of crossing this little sandy wash brought up all this emotion for me of, wow, like my dad is the reason I'm in Baja. My dad is the reason I know how to ride a bike the way that I know how to ride a bike. Like I have so much to give thanks to him for. And so I think I said something to the effect of, like, my dad is the one who taught me how to Baja. Like there is a way to be in Baja. And whether I knew it or not until that moment in time, because of my dad, that had been ingrained in me and was something that I learned naturally over time for just how to be there, how to engage with that place. And, I think the most powerful part of it, I mean, I was overwhelmed by emotion just in that, like riding across that sandy wash and having that little realization, but was also the sense of knowing my dad in a deeper way because of this experience that we just had, because of spending this time out there and really just honoring all that he taught me and all the ways that he influenced me to be outside, to connect with nature, to spend time with friends, and really to craft a life that allows for me to be able to take these trips and to have these adventures. He was always self-employed. So by the time summer rolled around and we were headed down south, his work plate was clear for a good month. Like he wasn't checking email. He wasn't taking any phone calls. Like when we were in Baja, he was only in Baja. And that was a really admirable thing, I think. And it's pretty tough to do in this day and age. But, without a doubt, a huge part of how my life has been crafted to this point is in thanks to how he showed me what a true balance in lifestyle can be.
Talking about that, the sort of nature of the world we live in right now, we both own our own businesses. We both have families. Like we have a lot going, like a lot of really special things go on in our day-to-day life that I think you and I both really love and really cherish. And it's really interesting because I think originally you started out with this sort of bucket list idea of being like, I want to do the whole Baja Divide, the whole buffet. I want it all. I know that in the past you've figured out ways to, you've traveled with your family for months and months at a time, figured it out with your work, how to do sabbaticals. You've left jobs just to do that. And you're not afraid to sort of shape your life to make it what you want to be. But it's also tricky because I think we both know that sometimes being like, hey, I need 2 months to go do a thing, it kind of won't always totally work with the other things we love. I think the cool part about the Cape Loop versus the Baja Divide is that it's this consumable piece of it, right? In the past, when we were working on the Appalachian Trail, I would meet people and I was always so impressed by it, that they would chip away at the whole thing over time. And they would do the whole trail over 20 years where they would just take their vacation every summer, do 2 weeks of it. And then the next year they'd do it that way. And I think as I've aged, I've had so much respect for that. I think that's an awesome compromise now. Some is better than nothing. And I think so often in this modern world, we forget that. We'll be like, nope, it's all or nothing, and I can't do this because I can't do the whole thing, or the whole thing is too logistically complex for me to disengage from the rest of my life. I think you've thought a lot about that, but how do you approach that?
I would say I agree with that now. And the reason I say that is because I've been bikepacking with another crew of guys since the early 2000s. And a couple years ago, my original crew, the annual Tour de Bros, which hasn't become annual anymore, it's every few years, but these same guys who I've been bikepacking with went and did this trip around Tahoe. And I had already been checking out the Baja Divide. And so at some point along that ride, I was like, hey, who wants to go to Baja? The Baja Divide's 1,700 miles. Let's pick a year somewhere out in the future and let's all go ride the Baja Divide. Well, I'm an idealist like many of us, I think. And when I first thought of the Baja Divide, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to ride the whole thing, that's what I'm going to do. And so I came home from that trip and I talked to my wife and I said, hey, how would you feel if I put this 5 or 6 week adventure on the calendar, a couple years out from now? And she was like, great, you got to do it, 2025 or 2027, whatever the year was going to be. And the year essentially came around. I mean, it was this year. It was 2 years after that Lake Tahoe ride. And when I reached out to all the guys, everyone was like, there's no way. It's not happening. There's no way we can make that happen. And I started to like read more and understand more and more how difficult the entire Baja Divide is and how time consuming it is, and seeing people that I really respect in the bikepacking world and know, like Ryan Van Duzer, it took him three different tries. Like he set out to do the whole thing 3 different times. And ultimately the first time came up short, and then he did another section, and then he finally was able to complete it. And, he's a fiend. He does huge rides. And so that reality of maybe biting off this whole thing is not the best way. And maybe because I've also never been bikepacking in the desert of Baja, I should get a little reality check first. And so that's when I realized that the Cape Loop would be the perfect test run, so to speak, for the crew, And so I put some dates on the calendar, and I sent the dates out to all the bros, all the old bros, and not a single one of them actually was able to make this trip happen. But because of that, obviously we got to have this journey too. And I mean, I've spent good time with all of us that were on this trip. So I knew that a new crew could be developed and have an incredible time too. And so we bit off the Cape Loop as sort of a test run. But for me, the realization also was that riding in Baja is really hard. It's way slower than you think it's going to be. While I would have loved to have gone on for, I don't know, maybe endlessly after the end of our trip, another week, another 2 weeks, I don't know. I was certainly ready to keep going by the time we rolled into what was our finish. But I think it was on the first day or second day of our ride where I was like, I was back there sucking wind at the back on a hot sandy section thinking, I don't know about this whole Baja Divide thing. In fact, I remember telling myself, like, I'm not even going to think about any of the other segments until spring break, right? Which is now still months in advance of us where we are today, right? By the third day, I realized, no, I'm actually really enjoying this. And what I thought was type 2 fun the day before actually was type 1. I just needed to embrace the slow pace and embrace the sand and embrace those things that were the bad. And remember that was what we came for. The Cape Loop, from a logistical standpoint of the entire divide, is quite straightforward, right? You can fly into La Paz, or you can fly into San Jose del Cabo, and you can fly out of San Jose del Cabo, and the route literally goes within a mile of the airport. So from that perspective, it's really, really straightforward. And it's also a manageable chunk of time. Any other segments on the Baja Divide would be incredibly difficult, because how you would get to another section, unless you're starting in the north at the border, or how you're actually going to link that up, like TBD. But I fully embrace the idea that now this will be something that is probably, who knows, maybe a 10-year project to do all or most of the sections. There's a couple sections that maybe aren't as enjoyable as others. And from what I understand, we started maybe with the best one. So, so we'll have to see how that goes. But I think it was only 2 or 3 days after we got home that I scribbled out like 5 300-mile chunks of the Baja Divide that would all be incredible segments to do just on their own as independent trips. So with the support of family who's willing to help make that happen, and friends who, like you, Fitz, who just say, yes, we'll figure out the logistics later, but yes, this needs to happen. And the willingness to go, I'm hopeful to keep ticking off a couple more chunks. But this one in particular is fantastic, and really just represents something that if you are a bike packer and you enjoy it and you know that you want to be out for a week plus, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's amazing.